Hi everyone, and welcome to Life After Corona, a conversation between concerned citizens and the elephant on the past, present, and possible future out of this pandemic. Today I'll be speaking to Mwalimu Mutemi wa Kiama. Mwalimu Mutemi is an activist, writer, organic intellectual, poet, critique, social commentator, based here in Nairobi, Kenya. Mwalimu Mutemi, karibu to the elephant.
Asante sana. I'm happy to be here.
I know. I mean, you've had quite the eventful past week, but just for the sake of the viewers, hey, how are you doing, and how are you coping, and how is your family in this age of COVID-19?
I'm well after the tribulations of the last 1 week under the state. They decided to use some taxpayers' money on me, driving me around this city. So far, I know Corona has really hit our, our pockets. So everybody is struggling. But in terms of health, I'm okay. Family is okay. Yes, and you're trying to figure out how to survive post-COVID if that time ever comes.
Okay, great. I mean, just to jump into it. You already talked about the ordeal that happened last week. You were abducted by state officers from your house, and I don't know if it's to your credit that you're able to record it happening, and of course it was shared on social media, and I know there was a campaign, a backlash from citizens online around what had happened to you. But just not to paint the ordeal, because we know what happened to you. But in your assessment as an activist, what did that tell you about where we as a country are in particular towards democratic ideals, values and principles of rule of law, justice, freedom of expression, etc.
So thanks. That's a very good question. So just a bit of context into how I ended up recording that incident. So I was part of a team that kept pushing. It was a team that after 2013, when the current regime got into power, pushed back because of the ICC. Everybody was being told to accept and move on. We pushed back. We kept informing Kenyans, giving Kenyans factual information. Challenging why people who are suspects should be in power and that kind of thing. And at that time, regime was disappearing people. So we went through some training as to how to deal with emergencies and this kind of situation. Of course, then we didn't have Facebook Live and all that. And later on, I've also trained activists on how to deal with such situations, the need for documentation, why it's important to document what's happening. And so after the first trepidation, I was a bit scared when they started banging the door, they want to break. And I spoke to guys within the Civil Society Protection Networks, SHRD and NAU National Commission. And they told me I have to make a commotion. I have to make sure my neighbors know, and then I have to record it. I have to make sure that I capture everything. And so when I went into on Facebook Live, that is what made Kenyans come on board and engage in the conversation on social media. And that really helped mobilize the solidarity. And so just now coming into your question, we have some gains, because now the fact that we know what the law says, you cannot come to somebody's house and arrest them without giving them a reason why you are arresting them. So we have some democratic gains. The fact that people can speak freely online, so far, there have been attempts. Of course, I view this as an attempt to shut us up, people who are vocal, who question or speak truth to power. And maybe by going after someone like me, who has a huge audience, maybe then it would intimidate others to keep quiet. So that incident in itself is a reflection of the gains we've made, but also the attempts that are being made to crawl us back, into, some people have quoted and said, into the 90s, in the intolerance of the 90s. And especially after going through Kibaki's relatively free 10 years. A lot of people have not believed when we tell them that Uhuru Kenyatta has dictatorial tendencies. And so this incident clearly illustrates that attempt to shut down citizen communication, freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of association, and to crawl back to a point where only the state sanctioned point of view prevails.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that also what that tells us is that the colonial state is still intact. You know, because there've been various attempts to reform the Kenya police, but you see, people don't understand the deeper issues. For example, when the colonialists came here, there were just a few hundred people, even maybe less than 100, but they needed to subjugate millions and millions of people. So they created what was called a force, a police force. And it was in part of its formation documentation that I've seen, for example, the ordinance, I think of the administration police, then it was not, it was called something King's Rifles or something.
African King's Rifles.
Africa King's Rifles to beat the natives into submission. You know, and this is the same attitude that has been with the Kenya police since that time, because the natives are you and I, because we are not. If you remember the narrative that I shared about the chiefs that was initially done by Surabaya online on my Twitter handle, but which I think is why I was abducted. What it does is that it shows Kenyans the connection between those colonial chiefs, because the chiefs again were a creation of the white colonialists. So you need local people who are compliant, who you can then give this police, and then they beat their own population into subjugation. So that was the divide and rule model. Create chiefs, give them money, and then it's the same thing we see in our politics today, where you have tribal chiefs or barons, that kind of thing.
Precisely.
So that mentality still continues to date. And
Right.
if you question, then they come for you. You know, the way they came for me to show me, who am I? Who are you?
Right.
You are nobody. Who are you to question this thing? You know? And actually, I can say I have a bit of privilege because I had a smartphone and I had internet in my house.
Right.
What if I didn't have, like any ordinary Kenyan out there? I'm not saying I'm not an ordinary Kenyan. I'm an ordinary Kenyan, but with a bit of privilege. What about that guy in Mathare, in Kibra, who's always complaining about the police, you know, the brutality that you're seeing in some of these informal settlements within the cities, you know? And this has been continued. People have been, calling for reform to have a police service instead of a police force. You know, and this tells us we're not independent. If someone can come when you have a new constitution that and statutes that stipulate how you, for example, I was asking them on video, just tell me which, I'm a law-abiding citizen. Tell me which police station you want me to come to, and I will come and report and answer the questions that you want to. You cannot just appear at my door at 6 p.m. just before curfew, and then you tell me you want to talk to me, and you have no identification, you have no search warrant, you have no documentation. And when I ask you to identify yourself, you don't identify yourself, and then you force yourself into my house, you know, in a relatively middle-class neighborhood. Not, just to based on the question that you asked, to say that despite the progress that you've made, it seems like in Kenya you make one step forward and then you make 2 steps back. You know, but I don't think Kenyans will allow this to happen. I don't think Kenyans are ready to let us to have a government that keeps people focused on such stupid things like like a police force. We spend so much money on these guys, and then their work is to harass citizens instead of serving citizens.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, hey, thanks for the elaborate answer. I mean, just quickly. I mean, I know there's been, for the last, quite a number of years, 20 years or so. I mean, just the mudslinging of the word activism. You know, when one describes himself as an activist, you know, there's the immediate, you're a noisemaker, you're a troublemaker. You know, recently you're a keyboard warrior. you know. So I mean, if you could just, I mean, since you define yourself as an activist, if you could define this word, you know, in terms of who is an activist, but more importantly, if you could also paint a picture how activism, I mean, if activism has evolved in the history of Kenya, maybe just a broad picture, if you could, please.
I mean, I use the word activist. There are many words that mean the same, including active citizens, including advocates, including, citizen spokespeople. But I deliberately use the word activism because it's been painted to be like for example, when people are called evil society, it's been painted to be something bad, and this started during Moi's time. But going back, I'll come back to that. Going back to activism, especially in our context here in Kenya and Africa, we've had many incidents of many activists that we read about in our history. People like Jeketile, people like Mekatilili Menza, just to name but a few. We remember even Jomo Kenyatta, the first time he went to the UK, he was sent by the Kenya Kikuyu Central Association,
Precisely.
which was an activist, a Kikuyu activist association that was trying to recover land that had been taken from the Kikuyu community. We have the Kavilondo Association in Luo Nyanza and many other such community associations that were being an activist is asking, things are supposed to be in a certain way, why are they not that way? And what can we do about it? So it's basically asking questions as to why things are not the way they should be. You know, so had people not been activists in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, would not have forced the colonialists out of this country. Had the Mau Mau not gone to the forest, Mau Mau were activists, only that they were using armed struggle because it's struggling against whoever is oppressing. So activist is, there's a struggle against oppression, but also there's the activist is when you have an authority that is in power and it's not performing as it should be, then it's any citizen's right to ask questions as to why things are not going the way they should be. In fact, personally, I believe every Kenyan should be an activist. You know, so we see Dedan Kimathi and his people and others in the 50s. As we come towards gaining independence, you see Daniel Moi, you see Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, Kadu and Kanu were actually initially activist formations.
Precisely.
That were agitating for power to come back to not power, but for self-rule and freedom and land and that kind of thing. That is in the 60s. And then Jomo Kenyatta gets into power and starts becoming an imperial president, and then more activism, political activism, especially by the one that is famous is by Jaramogi, but we do know that it was spread across the country. That is the one that got a lot of airplay because we had agreed with the go Majibo way, and then they forced a unitary state whereby they were trying to create a kingdom for Jomo Kenyatta. And that's a lot of that wasn't reported or documented for that one. It's not in our history book, but it is documented in some books that are not mainstream. They're not available widely. Some of them, maybe you'd find them at Kombozi Library along University Way and other spaces, university libraries, and most probably you find some of these were published abroad, so you find them in rare bookshops, so you find rare books. And that was in the 60s and the 70s. And then the 70s, of course, there's a transition to Kenyatta is senile, and people know that either he's going to die very soon or he's going to become incapacitated. And so there's activism in terms of who's going to succeed him. And then Moi comes in 1978 and starts repressing the people. So in the 60s, you're seeing activism that is based on politics, political parties, and Jaramogi forming a political party and it being what is the word for it? These are proscribed.
Proscribed, precisely.
Yeah, and people who could not fit into the kind of mode then resorted to activism outside outside Kanu. Then we are going into the 70s. We have JM Karaoke, who's agitating, and Bildad Kagia and others who are agitating also for a fair distribution of the national cake, including land and issues around that. And they are killed. A lot of them are either killed or they are economically, for example, they are shut down out of the economic activities. JM was killed, I think, in 1975.
Yeah, precisely.
There was a lot of people, Kumu Karumba and others. And then, so we come to Moi in the 80s. There's a lot of people, by the time Moi comes into power, there are a lot of people who have grievances, land, economic, access to economic opportunities, education, and that kind of thing.
And Kenya is a one-party state as well, so we can do political activism.
Democratic space, yeah. Precisely. So then that's the birth of the underground movements in Kenya, which are working in conjunction with some of the mainstream politicians. For example, we do know that the coup of 1982 that tried to overthrow, there were two coups in 1982, were involved different sets of politicians who wanted to remove Moi, and they were working together with activists and soldiers and askaris. And then that builds up to, people like Gindo Matiba, the Mulolongo thing in 1988, whereby now we have a fuss of democracy, whereby Kanu organizes an election where people with the shortest, the Mulolongo thing lines end up being declared the winners, and that led to another level of activism that was more mainstream, that people normal, academia came in. Although academia had been there in the underground movement in the Kenya and that kind of thing, but now they came out publicly. The opposition to the one-party rule became mainstream. Ordinary Kenyans with their grievances came on board, and mass movements emerged that led to the repeal of the Section 2A in 1991.
Precisely.
1991, 92, and then the professionalization of activism, the activists into NGOs, non-governmental organizations, what we call civil society today. So NGOs were formed from around 1990, coming on the way to the time, Kibaki. So very professional policy work, legal work, intellectuals, people with degrees in development work and that kind of thing coming into that space.
Right.
But still there being space for the ordinary person who has grievances that decides to organize and push for various things, release political prisoners, agitation for democratic space, for multipartism that was born by repeal of Section 2A. So we have parties, but we have allowed political parties, multi-parties, but we are still, Kanu is still repressing, and it's not allowing them to meet, it's not allowing them to convene, it's not allowing them to recruit members. So there was a different kind of activism within political parties, political space, but also outside the political space. And these were what I mentioned earlier. Evil society comes in, whereby Moi starts painting civil society as a creation of Western donors, as agitations. Wale wa Kenya ambao, there was, I think they used to call them citizens who are always griping, they don't have watosheki, hata wakipewa nini, and so there's that level of painting and casting. So you want to kill a dog, you give it a bad name. So
Precisely.
He cast civil society. Of course, they were his enemy, but he cast them as enemy of Wanjiku. That's even where we have this phrase of Wanjiku coming up, where he's asking, sasa nyinyi mnapinga, mnasema mnataka katiba mpya. How will it add sufurias of ugali to Wanjiku's kitchen? Wanjiku does not understand anything towards the katiba. And that evolves, and then we get Moi leaves, and then we work towards 2010, where we get a new constitution. And then now the activism evolves to making sure that the constitution is implemented. There's no clawback of devolution, decentralization. Devolution of power is part of reimagining the Kenyan state from the colonial state. But it was resisted. The minute Uhuru got into power, in fact, not even Uhuru, from 2010, the Kibaki people were immediately started clawing back the gates of the constitution to ensure that devolution does not take off.
Precisely.
Because devolution means taking decision making to machinani so that people can decide what they want to do with their resources. But what these guys, the nature of the colonial state is extractive. It wants to extract from the people, from their pockets, and take into the pockets of a few. And that means maintaining the centralized state. So the activism has morphed now. It's backed by a constitution. For example, we see our comrade Omtata going to court, public interest litigation as a citizen. We see institutions like Katiba Institute go to court on behalf of citizens. We see other kind of petitions that are backed by the constitution and by law. We see picketing, whereby citizens, if they have grievances, they either go to the streets or they petition their MP or elected member or MCA, or sometimes right now, as we are speaking right now, we are seeing activism by MCAs like in Kirinyaga, where they are trying to bring down the governors, and so there's that democratic space has opened, but is also being manipulated for political purposes.
Interesting. I mean, just to piggyback on just what you had mentioned, I mean, in a recent interview I read on one of our local stations, you had mentioned that civil society has taken a hit, particularly in the last 30 years broadly, as you already mentioned about Moi and Evil Society, but more so since, you had mentioned, more so since 2002. So in your view, how did this happen? What kind of hit took place, and how has that affected civil society today?
So the genesis of the civil society or NGO, let me use the term NGO, and there are two sectors, two broad sectors of the NGOs. There's a development NGOs, and then there's a human rights NGOs. So the one that Kenyans mostly refer to as civil society is the human rights accountability sector of the NGOs. Now, our government has been very clever around this. So Kenyans know NGOs to be the ones that provide water, provide build hospitals or schools. And within villages, we can see projects that have been started and they're incomplete. We know somebody who started an NGO and now they have a 6-bedroom mansion somewhere. And so when the government speaks about NGOs, that's what the picture that comes to mind. These guys are not accountable. They use money for their own enrichment. But the problem, the sector that the government has an issue with, it's not that. It's the sector that calls or holds the government to account. The one that says you cannot kill Kenyans, stop police brutality, please account for the money that the taxes and that kind of thing, which is the NGOs in the human rights and accountability, social accountability sector. And those are the ones the government has an issue with. So what it does is that it paints all of them with the same brush. So, say, our to NGO, they are funded by donors and they are bad people, they are evil society. And the genesis of this sector, the development, the human rights sector, again, is in the 90s. It's the one that professionalized and became so agitated for the rights of Kenyans. Some of them got into government in 2002 with Kibaki. So the culmination or success of the agitation of the 90s was Mwai Kibaki getting into power under NAC. And NAC was a broad movement created by civil society from NCEC and all that. These are I mean, that is documented very well. And a lot of them became permanent secretaries and cabinet ministers within Kibaki's government and that kind of thing. So there was that natural transition, and the sector was depleted. If you remember, people like Kareto Morongi were actually senior civil society leaders,
right,
before he became minister for energy, and then became a typical despot as the one that we see today. So there was that natural transition. Of course, there's retirement. Is the feeling that we have achieved. We've removed Moi and we've installed Kibaki. So to me, achieve. So people move on. Because being in the civil society does not pay very well. So maybe they're like, let me go now and look for money for my family. So there was that. Then there was also the fallout in between. So what is civil society basically? The broad definition of civil society is any space, organized space for the welfare of people that is not government and it is not business.
Precisely.
So it's a very broad term, yeah. So you find like if you have a Kiama, you have an investment group,
Yes,
that is a civil society organization. If you have a union for a certain sector, for example, flower unions or teachers unions, those are civil society.
Political
you have
parties.
a FBO, political parties, faith-based organizations. Media has been part of civil society. But now what happens is that as donor money started coming in, then there was separation. So you find right now you have civil society organizations that are faith-based and they get donor funding. You have civil society organizations that are NGOs, the normal NGOs that people are familiar with, they get donor funding. We have media that they run programs that some of them are funded, but also the interesting bit is how media and civil society split and how money played a role in it. So in the 90s, the Nation and the Standard would, go to march in the streets with the activists, But then after that, after the professionalization of NGOs, NGOs started getting money, and the media says, "No, you guys have money, so you have to pay us to air your stuff." And then that's when you have all these programs that are very paid for by donors that are running. So one section of the civil society becomes a cash cow for the other, and media says, "See, we are no longer civil society. You guys, it's you civil society," and the churches. And so there was that split again. But there was also now naturally, once you have a sector that has formed, is that money. This way money affects things. So you have what I would call a civil society status quo that is very protective of its space, because everybody is competing for these resources from donors.
Precisely.
So yeah, we have we've had what that has resulted is very little innovation, but also very little allowing of people from who have different mindsets to come in. A few have maintained the innovation. For example, the organization you work for that I used to work for called Inuka Kenya, because when I did a scan in Kenya, the elephant, that's a kind of innovation that shows when you open up space, you have that kind of, right now the elephant is an independent media organization that has been brought about by a civil society organization. But you have others that are very protective of their space. They don't allow any new thinking unless you come and work for them. And we don't like speaking about this candidly. So that also, but also the hammering that has been done by the state,
Right.
The funding has shrunk, so we don't have new organizations coming up, and then also the infiltration by the state. And this, I think, this is something that is not spoken about. So people have moved; they are within civil society, but they work for both sides. They work for the state and they work for civil society. But you can't tell who they are, because one thing Kibaki's side was very brilliant at is infiltrating the civil society NGO space, including the donors and the embassies with the Kenyans who work for the state.
Right. Interesting.
Yep.
Oh, that's a thanks for that broad paintbrush about how society has done fared in the last 20 years. But just now, not to take us in our current moment, just to move the conversation into June 2020. Just after a week after you've been abducted by police for your activism. Today, what's the terrain of activism today, and what are the big issues? I mean, for Kenyans listening to this thing, even before Africa listening to this thing, that we should be concerned about in the age of COVID-19, and moving into a new reality where COVID-19, we're seeing Black Lives Matter in America, again a very activist group. Also seen in New Zealand, we saw factions of women advocating for issues around Me Too, around gender-based violence. So what are the big issues, and what's terrain that activists need to go into and, organize, etc. And if you speak into that.
What we are seeing, there are two main thrusts around COVID-19. So before COVID-19, the world, Kenya and the world were witnessing the emergence of fascism. And the restrictions that come with COVID-19, what they've done is that they've allowed despots to then use those restrictions to stifle their opponents, to pass laws that give them, power that is unchecked.
Right.
And we've seen that here in Kenya. You're seeing now, for example, Ruto being finished because he can't do rallies. His modus operandi is very eloquent and charismatic. So when you deny him those meetings where he can go and speak to Kenyans and articulate his issues, basically you're constricting him, you're denying him his oxygen. And so the Uhuru regime has used that effectively. But at the same time, COVID-19 has woken Kenyans up. They've seen the inadequacy of the state because the state, for example, the first 1 month, the so-called leaders, the politicians, but now we can tell the difference between politicians and leaders. They disappeared. I don't know whether they were in bunkers or where they were hiding. And the leadership that emerged was from ordinary Kenyans. People would never look at as leaders who are organizing communities to try and mitigate the effect of mostly economic effect of COVID-19. People like Jerotich Say, Wanjiku who were able to fundraise. The Intelligence Council of Kenya and Kenya Tuitakayo movement came together and started the Jali initiative to try and fundraise, take care of those who are losing livelihood, who could not. And a lot of millions of Kenyans have lost their jobs. So the issues again. So before COVID-19, you talk about Article 43 issues, in terms of what Kenyans are entitled to. Article 43, I won't go into it, but in terms of health, education, housing, things that politicians speak to but never execute. But now at this particular time, when some Kenyans have no income, so they cannot get food, they're not able to access healthcare. And even when we looked at, remember at the beginning in February and March, we were speaking about hospital beds. 57 years after independence, we had only 20 ICU beds in Kenyatta National Hospital, not even in okay, now we bought a few, 10 here, 5 there, whatever, but they're still in a population of 47 million. It's a pittance. We have less, we still have less than, I don't think we've gotten up to 500 ICU beds. So if in case there's this COVID, there was a full outbreak, we'll not be able to deal with it. So issues of Article 43, organizing around the things that affect the Mwananchi, the Wanjiku, food, housing, health, security, education, being able to take kids to school, and a living, decent living. For example, I can give you this practically. Very few young men, Kenyan young men nowadays, and Kenya has a huge youth population, can afford to take their girlfriend for tea or coffee.
Yeah.
That dignity of being a man and being able to take your girlfriend out, was to use that as an example. And that is manifesting all over. Right. We have an explosion of single motherhood, or men who are not able to take care of their responsibilities, that kind of thing. Just one example. Then there are issues of, again, national values, so the leadership question, the Article 10 issues. What constitutes a leader? Is it politicians leaders, or are all politicians leaders, or And there's an image I shared on my Facebook page where I think you've seen it, of a pack of wolves.
Yeah.
And then it's divided in terms of which wolves are where and usually the leader is at the back to ensure that the entire team moves in sync, and usually it's the strongest wolf, and the weakest at some point they're being protected by others, and basically that's the definition of leadership, is helping others achieve their potential. So do we have that in Kenya? And I think COVID has shown us that actually we don't have leaders. If you look at even the money that has come, you can barely account for the 40 billion that has been raised to mitigate COVID. You don't know what is being spent on, although we are being told this and that.
Right.
Yeah, so those, of course, livelihood, there's a wider question of the environment, protecting the environment. So you can see the effects of the climate crisis, irregular seasons, so very hard for farmers to plan. Then, of course, protecting the constitution. That's another area that we are organizing around. And then there's so that devolution is not clawed back. We don't want another Kenyatta kingdom. We're in 2020. I mean, these guys, I don't know why they want to take us back to where we came. Like Kenya, there's something I think I've used this word before, what I call arrested development. That we have so much potential as a nation. We are running South Africa, we are running Namibia, we are running things in the US and the UK and all over. Kenyans are all over this planet running things. But when you come back home, these guys never give us, the politicians never give us space to implement the talent that we have. We have brilliant Kenyans running things all over the world, but they are not given that opportunity to do that here at home. So I believe that's another praxis, another area where we need to organize, we need to organize in terms of how do we harness the potential Kenyans have. Kenyans who are running things in UAE, in Dubai, in Japan, in the US, Saudi Arabia, wherever, I mean, all this pool of talent can contribute so much to development of Kenya and improvement of the lives of Wanjiku at home, back at home. So there are many opportunities, but also joblessness. I mean, this government doesn't look like it has any solution for Kenyans in terms of
unemployment,
to ensure that our youth are gainfully employed, but also employed in a way that, again, they're able to make savings and they're able to invest in their future and the future of their kids. So there's a state of paralysis, a state of despair within the country, and no one is offering the solution. So there's space for activism and organizing around solutions seeking for the challenges that we face as a country.
And
I don't know that answers your question.
No, it does. And what about the terrain? I mean, Nanjala Nyabola wrote a book launched in 2016, digital democracy and politics, talking about how the internet is changing politics in Kenya. So what are the new terrains that can be effective? And should we go back to the streets like in the 90s? Should we now engage on new media? Should we now go into political parties? And what are or should we re-engage the unions? What are the terrains that you think Kenyans need to go into more aggressively and think about such spaces with much more intensity?
So I'm a pioneer in the use of digital or social media for advocacy and activism. But the success that we've had with the use of social media is being able to also combine the online digital activism with offline. So you still have what I would call putting boots on the ground. So if you're just online liking and retweeting and without going out, then you're not going to scare Uhuru Kenyatta. You're not going to make him think that. But if you threaten to go and occupy State House, then So if you're able to use one of the reasons why we've been able to push back against the tyranny, I believe if we didn't have the social media and digital spaces, Uhuru would have consolidated his dictatorship by 2014, 2015, when Baba was away. You remember when Baba was away?
Right.
He had gone to the US. So at that time, the platform we built called Maskani ya Taifa was the only one that was pushing back against the tyranny by making sure that Kenyans are informed about what is going on and mobilizing Kenyans to take action. So the terrain is both digital and is both offline. If you look at the evictions that happened in Kariobangi the other day,
Right.
if it wasn't for smartphones and digital spaces, we wouldn't have known. Most probably those guys would have been closed and gone all the way. And then, but the organizing that had to happen the next day had to happen offline. So it's a combination of both. And what you do
and in offline, so to interrupt you, and in offline, what are some of the spaces? I mean, because I know there's the boots on the ground, as you mentioned, but what are some of the key spaces that you feel, particularly now in COVID-19, moving forward, there are key things that Kenyans need to move into and start and move into to organize and to advocate?
So we have to build a movement that is a political movement that is citizen-led and citizen-owned. I can give an example of ANC in South Africa as an example of the kind of movement I envision that we need to build. You see, ANC is both a movement, and then the movement has a political party. So we also need ideological political parties like the EFF, the ANC itself. You've seen ANC change leadership without it being an election year, because it's so powerful. It has such a strong citizen movement that it can tell the president, "We sent you to do this. You're not doing a job. Step down. We need to put someone else there to work for us."
Right.
So we need to build such agency, citizen agency, in a movement whereby we will not be pangwad kiweleweke tangatanga blah blah blah, because we will be in our own space. We the people will have our own movement. Raila Odinga can have his ODM, Uhuru Kenyatta can have his Jubilee, Ruto can have his party wherever, but they'll have to come and negotiate with these citizens and say, "We citizens, we know our interests." So there's need for a lot of political education. Again, that's another terrain. We need a lot of educate people. If you look at what is happening with Black Lives Matter, there's a tendency for people to paint them with a brand, and they say it was spontaneous. These things are never spontaneous. What happened in Sudan was not spontaneous. What happened in DRC removing Kabila was not spontaneous. It was a result of years of organizing. So that when the moment comes, for example, Black Lives Matter has been training citizens across US cities for the last 5-6 years. People have left, PhDs have left tenure in university to go and train. This is what happens when you organize. This is how you do peaceful protest. This is how you voice your demands to the state. This is how you mobilize within your community. So we need to do a lot of training of citizens so they're able, whatever their issue is. If the people of Northern Kenya and Isiolo have issue with land, the people of Lamu have a coal plant they don't want to build. People of Masai land want this and that, pasture and water for their attention. So we need to build a movement that trains citizens and mobilizes citizens to peacefully demand what is right for them and hold the politicians to account. And then we need to build political parties that are professional, that are not briefcase political parties. That because the only way to access power, unless through overthrowing the government, is constitutionally through a political party. So we need to build not the current political parties that are owned by individuals, as you're seeing what is happening to Etangula, to Mudavadi, to other, it's playing out even in ODM and Jubilee. We need parties also that are owned by the people, the members, not by politicians, that choose, that then choose who goes to represent them and can hold those people to account.
So thanks for that very good paintbrush for how Activism has evolved. But so today in the age of COVID-19, I mean, if you may, I mean, we're seeing Black Lives Matter across the world. We're seeing activists in New Zealand for advocating for gender-based violence and women issues. What are some of the big issues that activists and even citizens need to pay attention to here in Kenya, but also broadly in Africa, that are important for us? But also, what are some of what is the terrain that needs these new areas of contestation need to take place?
So COVID-19, what COVID-19 has done, it has done two things. It has exposed, so it has given despots the opportunity to suppress their leadership. I mean, their opposition. For example, what you're seeing in Kenya, whereby Uhuru Kenyatta is using COVID-19 to cut down to size the deputy president, because he's actually using it for his own succession. So across the world, despots have used COVID-19 to pass repressive laws or to suspend constitution, so that they are able to do as they wish. And so that's one area of contestation, and people are pushing back. People are pushing back, but also people are waking up. So in Kenya, the advantage, if you call it that, the good thing that has come out of COVID-19 is that Kenyans have seen the lack of leadership that we keep talking about. A lot of us keep talking about, but most of them cannot. Because what COVID-19 has done, it has slowed down people. People have more time to pay attention to some of these issues. We've seen the disappearance of our politicians into bunkers in the first month, but then you've seen also the emergence of people who we normally would not look at as leaders to organize people to try and fix. We've seen public fundraisers, for example, by Jerotich Sei, by Wanjiku. We've seen the Interreligious Council of Kenya come together with Kenya to Itakaya movement and a few activists, of which I'm one of them, and fundraise under a Jali initiative to try and mitigate the effects of COVID-19. So these are areas, the area of, again, as I mentioned earlier, Article 10, which is values. What are our values that govern us? Jali, caring for others. So it's organizing around that, and organizing around issues of livelihood, the environment, because the environment and climate, it's a huge, huge issue. It affects people's livelihoods. It affects people's money in the pocket. It is by affecting the economy. So there's organizing around this joblessness and the need, basically illustrating the need for citizen power, for citizens to organize themselves politically, not to leave these matters to politicians and political parties, but the emergence of political movements that are citizen-led, like Black Lives Matter, which requires organizing, requires training. You need to train as many young people as possible, because the young people are the ones who drive movements. They have the energy, and they're the ones who, if we destroy their future, if we mess today, like we are messing by looting the economy, it's their future that is affected.
Right.
Their future and their ability to navigate that future. So we must build powerful political movement. For example, if I could give you an example of a powerful political movement, although maybe I don't know whether it has achieved its mandate, is ANC, in South Africa.
Precisely.
You see, the ANC can, once the members decide whoever is president in South Africa is not serving their needs, they depose him. It doesn't matter whether there's an election or not. They say they recall that person, and once they recall that person has to leave the presidency. So we need to build political movements as such. And people need to make a distinction between a movement and the party. So there's ANC, the movement, and then there's a political party. And the political party is the one that goes to contest power. So you also need to build political parties that are ideological, that are people-owned, that are around issues. For example, farmers can build a farmers' political party. Herdsmen can build a political party that fights for the rights of people who do herding of cattle and goats, so that everybody has their interests represented at the table. So we need to build movements that are interest-based, political parties that are interest-based, and they are populated by citizens, so that they look after the issues of citizens. I give an example of this, we earlier spoke about change in the 90s.
Right.
So there was agitation for change, and that agitation led to the repeal of Section 2A, and then some people getting into government. And people lately have been talking about how Raila Odinga has betrayed them. But what people are forgetting is that Raila fought for change but he did not tell us what change, because it was his change, his definition of change. We did not have our own definition of what change we wanted. So he fought for change, and change for him was being at the table, whether it's with Uhuru Kenyatta or with Moi or with whatever. And he achieved the change he was looking for. He's at the table making decisions.
Right.
So why are we aggrieved, yet we did not articulate what the change we wanted? We are saying he's not fighting for our change. So we need to get citizens to the point where we define what change we want, and we organize and agitate for that change. Then we don't have to say someone has short charges. Yeah, I think Raila has done just fine. You know, people in the 90s, change for them was Moi out. Moi left. They got the change they wanted. Then they wanted change to be at the table. Kama ni nusu mkate ama nusu mkeka. He said he doesn't want, the change for him is a full mkate or full mkeka. So now he's at the table with, after the handshake, he's up there. He's gotten the change that he wants. Why are we surprised that even Parliament is defending Waiguru as we speak?
Right.
And so, but this does not just happen. It requires massive organizing. What we are seeing happening in the US and across the world is as a result of civil society training, organizing citizens on how to come together peacefully to protest or to petition or to picket. Right. Black Lives Matter has been training for the last 5-6 years across the cities. Even when there was no problem, you know, they were training because they knew. When we talk about Sudan, DRC, and all Egypt and all these other places, and people kind of say these things were spontaneous. They're never spontaneous. They require to have a revolution, the kind of revolution that you saw in Sudan or any other place. You require citizens to think in a certain way, constantly at the same time, and that comes from education. The fact that you've been trained in non-violence, you've been trained in how power manifests within, you know, understanding power, stakeholder mapping, and organize and discipline. What happens when tear gas, you know, when is thrown at you, do you run away? I think we've seen in Hong Kong squads of dealing with a tear gas can. One comes and covers it up. Another one comes and pours water on it. Another one comes and picks it up with a container and throws it. That requires training. You don't just do that. You don't just react like that out of instinctively. You have to be trained on how to deal with these things so that you non-violently you're able to protest and express yourself. And so I see the next few months, few years as a time for reemergence of and reimagining of what civil society is. And what areas of contestation based, because we have a constitution that allows us to do this. In the public interest litigation, the Omtatas and the Katiba Institutes going to court on behalf of citizens. But we need more citizens to also go to court. For example, I plan to sue these cops who broke into my house. It's my right, and I hope that the state, since I can't afford a lawyer, the state will provide one. But also the organizations that are willing to support. We also need, I feel, the next level, because of the shrinking space, shrinking funding also for civil society. It's time Kenyans started supporting their own civil society organizations, like I or activists like me. That if I'm going to court on behalf of citizens, why can't 1,000 citizens give me 10 shillings each to be able to afford a lawyer, or 20 shillings, you know? I imagine, for me, transformation, like when I talked about change for me is the day Mwalimu Kiama is aggrieved and the citizens in my neighborhood where I live are aggrieved, and you have an issue and you need to go to court, you can get 10,000 shillings, 10,000 people to give each 100 shillings to hire lawyers, you know? So that then, but Mwalimu Kiama also has kids he needs to take to school, and he's not employed by an NGO, but he's also working for citizens. How can citizens take care of some of his needs? So that's the next level of activism, whereby active citizens like I, work in conjunction with other citizens to be able to push for the issues that matter to them.
Interesting. So lastly, before I let you go, I know. Moving forward, we've talked about, the evolution of activism. What is activism? The terrain, the future of activism. You mentioned stuff of offline, online engagement, etc. But then, what kind of civic society do we need? What kind of do we need? But also, who are the players who have left the space? do they need to be re-engaged as part of civil society, and what should be the values and principles of civil society moving forward in the age of COVID-19?
So something else I forgot to mention is the nexus between the need to now harness the digital space and offline. So combination of both digital space and the traditional way of organizing, where you go to the streets. And I think we've seen this in Black Lives Matter, the organizing that has been done across the world. I think even governments are scared. Citizens can mobilize. Citizens are not scared of even laws that are being passed now in the US as we speak to even defund the police because they brutalize citizens. So this needs to inform us going forward. We need to, the elders of the civil society movement, to mentor the next generation of civil society activists and players. We need to help them to help us also reimagine civil society, because you have to keep reinventing. Threats might be the same, but the operational things have changed. We have new tools that we need to incorporate. We have things that have fallen on their way, but also there's a saying that power is never given, power is taken, and I guess that also means that the younger people who are coming up within the civil society movement also need to position themselves in a way that the elders can feel comfortable to leave the space open for them. So it's not just given on a platter. You have to prove yourself, and you have to create that space for yourself. And I believe that I think as we speak, there are people who are providing that space. The elders who are mentoring us. I know I've been mentored by. I've stood on the shoulders of giants. People like John Gidongo, people like former CJ Willie Mutunga, people like Maina Kiai, and others. I believe that space also exists for other people who are willing to be mentored to find space, but also come and now put their own imprint. So not just, for example, I do bash civil society sometimes because I'm in that space. It's about speaking truth to power, but I do not bash from I also join and I learn and I try and help innovate the change that we need to move into. I'm not outside there throwing stones. I'm in here, and when I know if I throw stones, I know those stones will hit me.
Right. Absolutely. But I hear you. But what about some of the external players within society? I mean, you had mentioned earlier, for instance, the media. You also mentioned the church. How should we re-engage? Should we re-engage civil society but also give it new impetus, particularly for a new generation?
So when we talk about building a movement and a citizen political movement,
right.
Basically that's my solution, and that solution means re-engaging different around issues. Of course, for example, what is the issue right now? Poor governance, poor leadership,
right.
Economic issues, joblessness. I cannot sit here and say I have the solution to the challenges that we face.
Absolutely.
So we need to bring together unions, labor unions. We need to bring together private sector, people like KEPSA and other private sector organizations. We need to bring people like the Interreligious Council of Kenya, other faith-based organizations. We need to bring together civil society, the civil society movement, the social justice centers, and at that table sit and mobilize citizens and seek for those solutions, because the solutions will have to be found from, and citizens are able to find solutions, in fact, most of the time, and government again also. So we engage with government because they are the guys who collect our taxes, and they are the guys who allocate how those taxes are used. So they have to be at the table. So going forward, as much as contestation will continue, I believe the movement will help us install leaders that will work for Wanjiku, so that if we solve leadership, we'll be 50% there. So you have a leadership that is there seeking solutions. And if you have that attitude change, it's not a citizen that is there to oppress Wanjiku so that they can remain in power and benefit from it, but it's there to seek solutions from knowing that there are many people who have ideas in Kenya. Earlier, I talked about how can we harness Kenyans who are abroad.
Right.
How can we give them space for them to, to contribute to the immense knowledge and technical knowledge that they gain out there, to finding solutions, the jobless solutions, the water solutions, food solutions that we need to move forward as a country.
Great.
So it's to build a broad movement that encompasses and invites Kenyans into a space where they're able to contribute and build this country going forward.
Thank you so much. I mean, Mutemi Kiama, on that very powerful note on that we need to build a political broad movement of different stakeholders, leave the conversation here. Thank you so much for joining me. Be well, be safe. Be safe.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, be well, be safe. No problem. And
you can only be safe. You can only be as safe as the state decides. This is why we need to build a state that is not a threat to the citizens.
Absolutely, absolutely.
These guys just knocked on my door. They just knocked outside my door. I don't know where they came from.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mutemi. Be well. Huh?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Santi.
Okay.